morning. It's nice to see all of you that we didn't get to say hello to before. I think before we get started on the subject of the Bible examples we have for Christian parents, we'd like to tell you a little bit about a young couple that my wife and I used to know. And the reason why is because when we first met them, we were impressed with them being possibly the finest set of parents we've ever seen in our lives. This young couple had a remarkable ability to know just how to take Bible principles and apply them as parents. In other words, how children should be raised. They knew just what to do as far as discipline was concerned. They knew how to take time with children. They just seemed to have everything well in hand. Excellent examples, really, as parents. Well, then it was shortly after that this young couple had their first child. Did you get that? That was my best joke in the whole morning. I'm shot now. Well, actually, what I'm talking about my wife and I. And the reason I say that is, see, when we were first married, we felt there was absolutely nothing to being a parent. We looked around and we said we couldn't understand why parents were having so much trouble with their children. We knew what to do. When we'd see a mother in Kingdom Hall with a child, we knew when to spank the child and when not to. We knew when to discipline. We knew when the teenagers shouldn't be allowed to do this and should be. We had no problem with that. We couldn't understand why parents were having so many problems. And then our daughter came along. And interestingly, it took 7 years before I would ever get on this platform and talk about the subject about being a parent again. It stood in 7 years in a state of shock, you might say. Well, the reason I tell you that experience is because as we talked this morning, the one thing I am not going to try to do is stand here and say, from experience, this is what should be done as a parent. I obviously don't even feel qualified to give that from experience because we have a long way to go yet. But we simply would like to look into the Bible at some parents in the Bible who we feel set excellent examples, and we, as parents, want to try to follow them. We'd just like to see if you'd like to think about the example they set. Now, obviously, many of you possibly have raised your families already, or maybe you don't have children, but there's still certain Bible principles that we all should feel assured about. Because we look around the congregation, and even if we don't have children, sometimes we do tend to sit there and say, well, this is what should be done, or that's what that parent should be doing. When in reality, it is a big, big job. Now, let me just ask some of you younger ones here. We have a few. I see. And I'm not talking, when I say younger, I mean like under 20. One congregation thought I meant under 55, and a lot of them were raising their hand. But you younger ones under 20 that have your parents in the truth, how many of you would like to see your parents be more like people in the Bible, some of the righteous people in the Bible? Raise your hand if you would like to see your parents be more like someone in the Bible. Would you, do you think? Okay, you'd like to see that, right? Fine. Now, let's get started by looking into the Bible. First of all, at a very important point, and this really, I think, sets the key to what we're trying to talk about today. It's in the book of Proverbs in the 6th chapter. And this scripture first really came to my attention when we had the Bible reading, when we were reading the Bible in the book of Proverbs. But it's an interesting verse. Sometimes we fail to appreciate it. Proverbs 6, verse 20. Does someone feel like reading that for me, please? Sister, please, here in the front. Would you read Proverbs 6, verse 20? Nice and loud so everybody can hear. Thank you very much. Who are the father and mother being talked about here? Would you say this is symbolic of, say, Jehovah and the heavenly organization? Do you think that's the father and mother this means? Brother Marshman? He was, wasn't he? But now, how about that term, the commandment of your father, the law of your mother? Isn't that indicating that as Christian parents, we have not only the right, but the responsibility to give directives, commands, laws to our children? In other words, we are required to set out what our children are going to do. Now, these laws and these commands are God intended to be an excellent guideline, in fact, a guideline for life for our youngsters. So though we sit down with our children and teach them God's law, because we know what it can do, we still must couple God's law with specific commands and directives for our youngsters in their everyday life that Jehovah's Word may not have commented upon. But we as parents have the responsibility and must exercise that responsibility. So then, we are saying today that in 3 areas we'd like to think that as parents we can take the Bible's examples of parents in the Bible and then incorporate our laws and commands in such a way as to lead our children in the way to life. The 3 areas I'm going to talk about are, number 1, just generally whether or not our children should be in the truth or not. Number 2, the point about dating. And then number 3, the matter of full-time service today in serving Jehovah. First of all, this matter about whether our children should be, just simply the matter of whether our children should be in the truth or not. If you sat down and you tried to think of some of the young ones in the Bible who had good parents and parental direction, any names come to your mind off the top of your head? Please, sister? Samuel, very good. We're going to talk about him. Any others? Had good parents. Parents led them or helped them. Sister, please? Timothy, right. He's the one I wanted first. And Brother Marshman? Okay, Abraham brought up his children in the right way. Many others, right? We're going to get into some of them. Let's deal with Timothy first, okay? Now, we know that Timothy was raised by whom? I mean, who really gave Timothy the help and guidance for life? Brother Straley? Mother and grandmother. Let's turn to the book of 2 Timothy, please. Chapter 1. And we'll just look briefly at that verse there to establish that Timothy was indeed helped along by his mother and grandmother. 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 5. You see their name there, Lois and Eunice. The grandmother was Lois and the mother was Eunice. Now let's turn over to chapter 3 and verse 14. Now, this is an interesting verse. And again, I think it's one that we know real well. I'm not going to read too many scriptures that haven't been brought out before. 2 Timothy 3, verses 14 and 15. It says, "You, however, continue in the things that you learned and were persuaded to believe, knowing from what persons you learned them, and that from infancy you have known the holy writings, which are able to make you wise for salvation, through the faith and connection with Christ Jesus." We remember that, don't we? Timothy was raised in the truth, apparently, from infancy. Excellent point. Now then, that means that, other than the way the world does it, see, the world would, you ever meet parents in the field, they'll say, well, I'm going to let my child grow up, and then I want him to decide what he's going to do religiously. Let him decide what church he's going to go to, right? In fact, I think that's an excuse that some parents use for staying home from going to anywhere, simply because I want my children to come up and let them decide what they're going to do. Now, obviously, that's not the way Eunice and Lois did it, is it? Now, as Christian parents today, how do we want to raise our children? Do we want to leave them with the idea, well, it's all right, whatever they want to do? Certainly not. This is the place for them. We believe that by serving Jehovah is the only way to get everlasting life. And so right from youth on, we want to establish that our young people are going to serve Jehovah right along with us. But you know, there was even, from time to time, I don't know that there was a specific time period, but from time to time parents have come up with this one, I don't want to force him out in service. I want him to go willingly. I don't want to force Johnny to go out in service, you see. Or I don't want to force him to come to the Kingdom Hall. Do you think that's the way Lois and Eunice were? Do you think they sat back and said, Timothy, would you like to go along today? Hardly. Or do you think Timothy was some special young boy? Can you picture Timothy, maybe at the age of 10, 11, 12, running into his mother in the afternoon? Oh, mother, could you teach me some more of God's Word this afternoon? Do you think that's the type of boy he was? When the games were going on, the athletic contests were going outside, Timothy was going to run into the house and say, teach me God's Word? Obviously not. Don't you think there was some meaning behind what Paul said when he says to continue in the things that you learned and were persuaded to believe? Anyone who has ever tried to teach the Bible to young people knows you do a lot of persuading. Sometimes it isn't a matter of persuading them whether a doctrine is true or false, it's whether they're going to sit down or not. But there's persuasion. So obviously Timothy was blessed by having a mother and grandmother that persuaded him to believe in the truth. Now, that may seem like a very simple point, but you know, as we look around today, quite obviously, many parents are unsure of how far they should go in persuading their children to accept the truth, whether they should force them or not. You might remember this experience, and was in a kingdom service back in 1979. The brothers write, they said, "We are reminded of one case of a father who had for some time allowed his children almost total freedom in coming and going, not requiring anything of them in building a spiritual personality. Then the day came when he saw that he must do something. As his two teenage children put it, he put his foot down, insisting on their undertaking a serious study of the Bible. It was not easy at first, but as the children reported, we could see by his firm, loving tone that he was serious about Bible knowledge. These children progressed in knowledge and commented, 'We dedicated our lives to Jehovah, were baptized, and soon after started pioneering. 9 years have passed since then, and we have never regretted that our dad put his foot down to us.'" But do you see the point? How easy it is sometimes, especially as our youngsters get into the teen years, that we kind of just let them drift along. We might even let them come to the Kingdom Hall with us, but not really persuade them, insist that they pursue a serious study of God's Word. Are we letting them go till they get to the point where they're going to decide what they want to do? Or do we believe as firmly and as Eunice and Lois that the truth is right for them? Hopefully that's the course we're going to take. Okay. Now, one thing to keep in mind, though, and obviously Timothy and, Lois and Eunice must have done a good job of this when they were raising Timothy, and that is that when we teach our children the truth and we bring them along, one thing we as parents owe them is to represent the truth in the best possible light. In other words, give them the best possible circumstance in which to serve Jehovah. For instance, field service. Is field service such a drudgery that the children would have to view it as a terrible experience anytime they get dragged along? The reason I mention that, I always recall as a young person, of course, I guess when we grew up and were being trained in the door-to-door work, the times were different then. Sister Zierden probably remembers well when I was young, and I was literally had to be dragged out in service. I wasn't much for it. But one thing I always remembered was, boy, you just had to march right along to the door, and you stood there and you didn't move, and everything it just seemed to be so regimented. I'll never forget the experience of when Kelly was first able to walk, and we'd be taking her out in service, and actually her first inclination was to maybe want to go over there and look at something in the grass. And so I'm saying, no, we got to go on to the door. And then I stop and think, why? Why can't she stop and look at whatever it is? We'd do it if we were going shopping or if we were doing anything else. Why wouldn't we do it here? Certainly in the Bible it doesn't say you're not allowed to enjoy what's going on around you while you're out serving Jehovah. And it opened my mind to something. That there are other things besides knocking on that door and talking to people and moving on to the next door that go along with life. And certainly when we're in field service, although we're not making it a game, but still there's fullness of life there. Can our youngsters enjoy the time they spend in field service? Coming to the Kingdom Hall, going to an assembly. When there's a meeting on, that's the time to be sitting in the seat, paying attention. But certainly can't there be joyful experiences coupled with our serving Jehovah? We have families in the truth. Do we spend time with them so our youngsters get to play? We don't want them out playing with worldly children. Do we make sure that they have enough time to spend with ones in the truth who can be good association? Again, if we believe that what the truth has means life for our children, we'll make the effort to give them the best possible circumstances in which to come into the truth. Now, this next subject I'd like to deal with is, as I said, the one of dating. I don't see too many around of dating age, but that time comes very quickly, so let's think about it a little bit. Now, here's where the emotions start to boil a little bit. The question of dating. Well, you know, this is one place where that scripture in Proverbs really comes to the fore, because how much does the Bible say on the subject of dating? Anyone remember a particular verse on dating in the Bible? Not too many, are there? No. It's a subject that's not really discussed because, well, number one, the custom of dating today, you couldn't find anything in the Bible to even approach it. They didn't do that type of thing then. But you know, there are a lot of things we can learn in the Bible about chastity, about taking the marital arrangement seriously, about proper conduct between members of the opposite sex. Much is said there. And so we do get some excellent principles. So the society, through the pages of the Watchtower, the Family Life book, the Youth book, have given us fine directives on how we can raise our youngsters. But in addition to that, there's some excellent Bible examples that help parents see how far they really can go with their responsibilities. Now, usually where the problem of dating comes in, it's rare that we have a conflict where mother says, daughter, go out and get a date. And the daughter says, no, I don't want to go out and get a date. I want to stay home. Usually it's the other way around, right? It's more a matter of the teenager wants to date than mother says no. Well, now, is that the parent's prerogative? How far can a parent go in restricting a child? Well, let's look again at the Bible examples we have, all right? How about the book of Judges in the 11th chapter? Now, as we said, this won't necessarily be on dating, but I think you'll see the principle very quickly. Judges chapter 11, and once we get there, you'll find that we're going to talk about the man, a righteous judge in Israel named Jephthah. And then you probably remember the story, right? In fact, once you have Judges chapter 11, I wonder if someone would just briefly tell me the story of Jephthah. What happened here? You know the experience. He was out in battle, and then he came home, and what happened? Anyone remember the story of that? Sister Zierden?
He had promised to him God if he would win this battle for Israel, that the first one that came out to greet him would be offered to Jehovah as a sacrifice.
Okay. Now then, let's think. What did Jephthah have in mind? Was he talking about the first animal that came? Did he have in mind that an animal would come out to greet him that he could offer to Jehovah as a burnt offering? Was that what his thinking was? Please, sister? Exactly. So he was not thinking animal, he was thinking person. Now, we normally feel that what Jephthah might have had in mind, maybe pictured in his mind was going to happen was what? What, Kelly? Yeah, maybe some servant girl or some person that worked for him might come out of the house, you see, and he could offer this one. But when Jephthah made that promise to Jehovah, he also had to realize that his very own daughter could come out of that house because she lived there. And she was one of the household members. So though when he saw her come out, his initial reaction was sorrow. Because he realized now that he was going to lose his daughter, although giving her to Jehovah. But he still knew when he made the promise that it was a possibility. So he wasn't shocked. Now, what was it that he promised? He promised that his daughter was going to go serve at the tabernacle. Serve Jehovah in a full-time way. What's that have to do with dating? Well, it had a lot to do with dating for her. Because it said in verse 37, when she realized what had happened, she says, Father, let's do it, because Jehovah has helped you. She says simply, let this thing be done to me. Let me alone for 2 months, and let me go, and I will descend upon the mountains, and let me weep over my virginity, I and my girl companions. Jephthah's daughter realized that because of her father's promise to Jehovah God, she would never marry. And that was a big thing to an Israelite girl. If you think it's big today, it was bigger to them back there. Marriage and having children just had to be part of life. And she recognized now that she was not going to have that privilege because of her father's relationship with Jehovah God. Now you see, he wasn't saying you're going to have to do without dating until I feel you're old enough to begin to pursue a marital arrangement. He was saying she would not ever date or marry. Now, we're not saying as Christian parents that we're going to go that far, are we? But when it comes time to have restrictions or place restrictions, and we as parents begin to wonder, oh, should I do it or shouldn't I do it? Think how far Jephthah went. Because he was convinced that what he was doing was going to please Jehovah God. And that arrangement, that relationship with God was most important to Jephthah. But now, you know what? You sit down with your teenage daughter or your teenage son, and you begin to cite restrictions. No, you cannot go out Saturday night with Johnny. Have you ever heard this one? If I can't go out Saturday night, I'll just die. That's the way my mother said. I used to say it, I think. I don't know. Ever heard that one? It just seems like their life's going to end if they can't have that date, right? How about the book of Genesis, chapter 22? Genesis 22. When you get there, who are we going to talk about? Some young one find that one for me? This time younger than 55. All right. Young man, go ahead. Abraham and... Over here, young man. Isaac, thank you. Abraham and Isaac. And you remember this experience, right? This was when Abraham took his son up on the mountain, built an altar, and put his son upon it, and raised a knife over him. Remember that? I might just pause here. Remember you young ones that said that you wanted your parents to be more like those in the Bible? Any of you want to change your mind on that now that we got to Abraham? Okay. Now, imagine what he's saying. He wasn't saying, Isaac, you can't date for another 3 years. He wasn't saying, Isaac, you can't date for the rest of your life. He was saying, Isaac, you're going to stop breathing. He was going to take his life because that was Jehovah's command to him. Now, again, it may come down to the point where our youngsters think we are taking their very life by the restrictions we put upon them. But if, as Christian parents, we're convinced that that's what God's Word instructs us to do as far as keeping purity and chastity, and keeping a proper arrangement for our youngsters, then the restrictions we put down are ones we should do and back up. Now again, Proverbs said the law of the mother, the commandment of the father, not the law of the elders, the commandment of the older brothers and sisters in the congregation. No one else can tell our youngsters when or when they should not date. The reason I mention that, there was a situation came up recently that we faced, where a family realized that their son was getting into a relationship that was just not going to be a good one. Both members were too young. However, the parents didn't know quite what to do about it. So they came to the elders and they said, would you talk to our son? Would you sit down with our son and help him understand that he's too young, that this arrangement just will not work out to Jehovah's blessing? So the elders sat down in this instance to try to help the parents. The first word out of the father's mouth was, before we could even get started, the father says, well, now, I don't want him to stop. You see, I just want him to slow down. Can you picture how that would tie the hands of brothers who would try to use the Bible to reason with young people? Because in reality, what they were saying was the youngsters were way too young to even consider marriage. And therefore, they had no business dating. But what the parents were willing to do was let them date, just slow down. Well, you know, that's like trying to go out and tell your car engine, I'm going to slow you down a few RPM by grabbing the fan belt. You know, you're just not going to do that. So you see, again, it comes home to the parents. If parents are going to put down restrictions and they firmly believe in them, they can do it, then look to the elders for support. But they can't look to the elders to make the rules. That responsibility comes home. It's a tough one, And I know it's not a popular one to get on the platform and talk about, but it's a responsibility that we as parents have. But now, let's even go a step further. What about, we've talked about we want our children to be in the truth. We may set restrictions upon them. What about the idea, though, of our youngsters actually serving in a full-time capacity? Maybe as pioneers or going to Bethel or doing things like that. Full-time service to Jehovah today. Is that something we sit back as parents and if we really believe that that's the thing they should be doing? Do we sit back as parents and say, oh, I hope he pioneers, I hope he pioneers? Or can we as parents really lay the groundwork and set the directives to help our youngsters reach out for that goal of full-time service? Well, again, a Bible example that someone had mentioned earlier in the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 1. Now, you recall this from our theocratic school in the Bible. Let's see where we have this. Bible storybook this week? In the 5th talk this week, right. Remember that? We talked about Hannah. Now, as we get to 1 Samuel, we remember Hannah was bereaved because she didn't have a child. So she prayed to God and she said, oh, Jehovah, if you'll just give me a son, I'll do what? What did she promise to do? Brother Marshman? Give him to Jehovah. She says, I will give him to you. And we know that the way that worked out was that she took her son to the tabernacle to serve there. Soon after he was weaned, he was a very, very small boy. She took him there to serve Jehovah. Now picture that. Did Samuel ever get to have a say in what he was going to do the rest of his life? Did they ever sit down with Samuel and say, Samuel, do you think you'd like this? No. The decision was made before he was even born. That that's how he was going to serve God. Now, we might say, yes, but you see, that was a completely different time. That's not done today. Well, in one sense, it is true. I don't think the society would appreciate it if you took your 4-year-old son up to Bethel and said, here, I want to give him to you. In fact, they've already said, what, it's got to be 19 years old or so. They found even the 18-year-olds were a little bit young. So that's not what we're encouraging. But what about that? Why could Hannah make a promise to God that her son would be taken to the tabernacle to serve there, devoted to Jehovah? Now imagine, we even know that the way it turned out, when he went to serve there at the tabernacle, he was put into association with some very immoral young men. Remember, Eli's sons were there, and they were just terrible. And don't think that nobody knew about it. It seems like even around the countryside, it was known just how bad these young men were. So obviously Hannah knew that her son was going to have to face that type of association there. But still she could make the offer. Why? Hannah and her husband were obviously convinced that nothing better could be done than for their son to serve Jehovah with his full strength. She even promised that a razor would never touch his head, meaning that he would be a Nazirite. In other words, he was really being devoted to Jehovah in a special sense for the rest of his life. But she was convinced that that was good for him. Nothing better could come to him than if he served in that situation. Now today, do we feel that way about full-time service, about pioneering, about Bethel life maybe, about missionary service? Do we really feel that our youngsters could do nothing better than to devote their lives in a full-time way to serving Jehovah? If we do, then why can't we, from the time our youngsters are infants, lay that before them as a goal? Let it become obvious to them that though we're not going to force them, in fact, the society even made the comment recently in talking about encouraging ones to come to Bethel, no one should feel forced to come to Bethel or apply to serve at Bethel. But still, why can't we set it before our youngsters as though there is really no other course that we expect them to take? In other words, from the time they're infants, we make it clear to them, this is where we see them going. This is how we see them serving Jehovah in a full-time way. And make every possible arrangement for them as youngsters so they can pursue that goal. If we'd like to see our young people serve at Bethel, have we given them the chance to see it? when they're teenagers, say, or even younger, so that they can actually see what a blessed life that would be, and it would become enticing to them. They'd reach out for that, you see. Or pioneering. Have we let our youngsters meet pioneers? I'll never forget the first time I ever met a special pioneer couple. I had no idea. I mean, I'd read about special pioneers in the old book we used to have, what, Preaching and Teaching and Peace and Unity, Organization, whatever those books were back then. I never knew what a special pioneer really, I didn't know if they looked different or what, And the first time I met a special pioneer couple, I couldn't believe how happy they were. I was just a teenager. But once I saw what they were doing, it became evident that, if the time ever came, I really could do that too. That wouldn't be out of the realm. I always figured it was impossible, But once you actually saw that real people were doing that and having a fantastic time, then it becomes a possibility. But do we make the effort that our young people meet them? Do we go to circuit assemblies if we know there's pioneers in the circuit having a successful time serving? Do we ever take the effort to introduce our youngsters to these pioneers or the circuit overseers, others in full-time service? There's just an interesting little thing in here, but something that Hannah did for her son Samuel. Let's see if I can find it here. I can't. Every year she did something, though. Do you remember what it was? Probably a good thing I can't. Sister, That's right, exactly. Yes, she took a little coat up there. Now that seems like a small thing, right? She made, but don't you appreciate that within that family, the arrangement that they felt that was important was that their youngster be able to keep serving Jehovah in a full-time way, and they kept making arrangements so that he could do that. Again, that's the type of thing that we as Christian parents want to do. Take the stand, make every possible arrangement so they can enjoy the full-time work. If we lay down definite guidelines, if we help them to see what Jehovah wants, our youngsters can reach out for these things. But then the question comes up, but what if it doesn't work? What if all I do this and they as teenagers rebel against it, or they don't want to serve Jehovah? Well, is all lost then? Well, first of all, one scripture comes very much to the fore in our minds, and that's in the book of Luke. It's an example in the 15th chapter. And this example was of a young man who apparently left his father's household, but in more than that, he left off serving Jehovah because he went out and did things that a man of God wouldn't do. Remember this, we call this experience what? Luke 15, remember? Sister Saunders? The prodigal son, right? Well, there's an interesting thing there. He took his inheritance and he left. He went out and he wanted to have a good time. He went out and pursued that. But then, as we remember the story, things got to going badly for him, right? He started to really see how decrepit the world was and what a miserable life he had out there. And then it says something that he began to do. This is in Luke chapter 15, and let's see, 118, I think. Verse 17. It says, when he came to his senses, he said, how many hired men of my father are abounding with bread, while I am perishing from famine? I will rise and journey to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Make me as one of your hired men. Well, when we think about this young man thinking like this, the point that really comes to the fore is he wasn't just thinking about eating, but he was really thinking back to what it was like living in his father's household. Oh, there may have been guidelines that he didn't want to keep. His father may have made restrictions on him that he did not want to be subjected to. But he thought of how good it was compared with what he had. And he says, here's what I'll do. I'll go back and talk to my father. And he even pictured himself saying the words to his father. So he must have even trusted how his father would respond. Now, it won't always happen. But if that thing happens, what a joy we would have. But you know, even if it didn't happen, would anything else have been better? If we as Christian parents let our children go just as they wanted to go, would that have been better? If we made no restrictions for them, would that have given them a better life? Would they be in the truth today if we just turned them loose when they were infants? Obviously not, because those in the Bible never did. They, no matter what, set the guidelines down, and obviously that's what Jehovah wants us to do. I have a little experience on tape I'd like you to listen to, and I'll just explain this. This is an experience a young brother was telling to members of the Bethel family, so you might hear laughter in places you wouldn't have laughed, but remember, these are young people that all know one another real well. But just listen to how closely this almost sounds like the book of Luke.
You really want to hear it, huh?
Yeah, sure, Andy. Tell us about your life story.
It's a long story.
Tell us how you came to the truth.
Well, okay. Well, I might start off by saying that my dad was in the Air Force, and he was stationed in Japan. And it was at that time that I was born. And we stayed there a couple of years, and then from there, due to my dad's military tours, I then moved us to California. And this is where my mother got in contact with the truth. So she brought us up well in the truth, although my dad didn't oppose it. He went along with it, but he still stayed in the Air Force. And then later on, we moved back to Japan again. And then several years later, we moved to Hawaii. And I was, at that time, going into the 7th grade. And it was at that time where I really began to care what others think about me. And, you know, how I wanted really to be accepted with my new schoolmates. But because we were in the truth and my parents restricted me, I always wanted to know where I went. And I always had to go to the meetings. Well, it was just a frustration on me. So I started to rebel. You know, I did what everybody else did in school. Well, I did worse, maybe. I went to stealing. And
you're in 7th grade now?
Yeah, I was going to 7th grade. I did a lot of stealing. And then I picked up other bad habits like smoking cigarettes and drinking. And then I even went to worse things like sniffing glue and paint. I did this for a number of years. And, well, all this time, you know, my parents still made me go to the meetings and still do what's right, but it was really getting to be a frustration with me. So I began running away, and in fact, my mother puts it, I always did disappearing acts. I always disappeared on them.
Man, your folks must have been disgusted with you, Andy. Didn't they disown you?
Well, that's one thing that really stuck in my mind. No matter what I did, they always showed love and concern for me. You know, they never just said, well, I'm never going to think about you or care about you anymore.
So they were still kind to you no matter what you did?
Right. Like, when I ran away, I got into an accident and I landed in the hospital. Why, they came over there to pick me up. Or when I got in trouble with the policeman, I got thrown inside a detention home, and there they were to take me out. So that really stuck in my mind. And my dad always disciplined me. In fact, he was a black belt in judo, so threw me all over the place, you know. So one day I got so frustrated in him trying to, you know, discipline me and make me do what's right, that I went into my room and I knew he was going to give me a licking that day. So I loaded up my spear gun. And as soon as my dad walked into the room, I fired it at him.
Oh, you didn't shoot at him?
Well, I'm sure glad he jumped out of the way, or else I would have really hurt him. So from there, we moved to another part of the island, and I still kept up with my bad practices. I went into taking dope, marijuana, and taking a lot of LSD. And at that time, my dad got out of the service, and he got baptized the following month, and a couple years later, he got appointed as a servant. But because I was still being a rebellious, hard-headed kid, well, my dad stepped down from being a servant in the congregation. So finally, I made 18. Now I can finally get out on my own in the eyes of the law. Well, I was old enough, and I could leave home. So now I could do exactly what I wanted to do. So I went to live with this other person, and I got laid off from my job, so I had to do something. And the only thing I was good at was stealing.
What did you steal?
Well, my friend and I, we went into organized stealing. Why, we would take orders from people, and maybe if they wanted a color TV, they knew they were stolen, or a car, or maybe jewelry. Yeah, we steal it and then we sell it to them the following day.
Fire school, right, Eddie?
Yeah. So then we kept this up, and that was my income. And then we had robbed a policeman's home one time, and then we got ourselves some firearms. We got ourselves a couple of 38 pistols and a shotgun, and that shotgun was mine. And so from then on, we went to pulling armed robberies. And with all the money that we got, we invested it in dope, and then we flooded it in the schools. But, you know, all this time I knew that I was doing what was wrong. And I knew that if Armageddon came, I would be destroyed. But I wanted to do what I wanted to do, you know. So one night when I was on LSD, in fact, a number of times, I felt so depressed and down. You know, I wasn't really happy doing what I wanted to do. I had my own place to live. I had my own car. Had endless supply of dope, but I wasn't happy. So one night when I was stoning out with my friends, I felt this very despondent feeling again, and I went to another room. And I thought I'd like to kill myself right then because I couldn't understand why I wasn't happy. So when I was about to do away with myself, I thought about Jehovah at that very moment. I can't even explain why I thought about him, but it came to my mind, and then everything started to get clear. Why, that's why I wasn't happy, because I wasn't doing all that my parents had taught me when I was young, to serve Jehovah. So then I immediately stood up, and I went to see my friends in the other room who were going at it, and I told them, hey, fellas, I'm going to go home. I want to serve my God Jehovah again. They looked at me, and they laughed at me. They thought I was flipped out. They thought I went crazy, you know? So I stumbled down the stairs, and I got in my car, and I started up that motor, and I headed for home, because I knew that's where my parents would give me help. So while I'm driving home, just tears are coming down my eyes, because I knew now what would really make me happy now. In fact, I was yelling out Jehovah's name all the way home. And then when I got home, well, you can imagine how I look. My eyes are all bloodshot. I look really stoned out. And I knock on the door, and my parents come to the door, and I says, Daddy, Mom, you know, I want to do what's right again, so could I come home again and you can help me?
Just like the prodigal son.
Right, it reminds me of that. You know, it reminds me of that scripture in Proverbs 22:6. says how to train up a boy according to the way for him, and even when he grows old, he won't turn aside. So that's what happened. It was always in me. I knew Jehovah. So from then on, I got things cleared up with the authorities, the things I had done wrong, and then I got baptized about a year later, and then I came up to Bethel. And I said to myself, someday I'd like to come to Bethel, but first I wanted to pioneer. So after the vacation, I went back home, and then I pioneered for about a year, and I thought that was enough. So then I put in my application to Bethel, and finally I got accepted. And I can say, for being here almost 2 years, it's been the best years of my life. And I could really agree with what King Solomon said in the book of Ecclesiastes 12:13. He said, the conclusion of the matter, everything having been heard, is to fear the true God and to keep his commandments, for this is the whole obligation of man.
Quite a story, really. What a blessing. But the thing is, it won't always happen. But no matter what, as Christian parents today, we have every reason to believe that those guidelines, those commandments, those laws that we lay down may not be received easily, may not even be put out easily, but we have no better example to serve than those in the Bible.
Well, Brother Schuller, we really enjoyed that very much. We appreciated those thoughts and fine examples that you've expressed to us, and particularly how we as parents should really set these guidelines and set the right example for our children. Well, I want to thank you and your family for being with us this morning, and we certainly hope that you will take back our love to the congregation with you.
Make yourself available today for full-time kingdom service. Should you not be going all the way and join the missionary ranks? The field is ripe for harvesting. The call for laborers is clear. So fully pay your vows to God if you couldn't draw near. Jephthah made a vow that once and for all, his loving only daughter, greatly as he loved her, he resolved to pay to God what he had vowed. We see the faithful remnant blessed, like Jephthah quite unselfishly. They dedicate their fruits to God, pay their vows obediently. Have you dedicated yourself now? Then be like Jephthah's daughter, serving for the cause of his great vow. If possible, go preach.